Welcome to the fourth lecture in the Road to War series. Today we will examine the ways in which Hitler achieved Anschluss in 1938, or unification with Austria. We will first examine the reasons why Hitler wished for Germany to unify with Austria. Then we will examine a chronological account of events that led to Austria becoming part of the Third Reich. Finally, we will examine the consequences of Anschluss both in terms of the growth of Nazi power and the international reaction. Let's first examine a map of Austria and its location in Europe. We can see that it is a landlocked country in the center of Europe that shares a large land border to the north with Germany. It also borders Italy to the south, Czechoslovakia to the north and Hungary to the east. This means that it would have a strategic advantage for any future war in Central Europe. There were both personal and political reasons why Hitler wished for Germany to unite with Austria. Firstly, Hitler was born in a border town of Austria, so this was his homeland, and it would suit his personal aims to see the unification take place. Germany had formed the Central Alliance before World War I with the former Austro-Hungarian Empire, so there was also a political motive to this unification. It would mutually benefit both nations by building up the strength of Central Europe. Furthermore, Austria and Germany had a shared language and culture since Germany had been ruled by Austria for 600 years in what was known as the Holy Roman Empire, which had covered most of Central Europe. Therefore, Hitler had ideological reasons unification with Germany would truly create a Third Reich, in other words a third glorious empire in Central Europe. In addition, Anschluss would achieve Hitler's key aim of Lebensraum. It would create living space for German-speaking people both sides of the border. Austria had many fertile farmland areas and was especially famous for pig farming. All this would add economic value to the Third Reich. Finally, Hitler targeted Austria because it was another way to defy the Treaty of Versailles. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had formed a central alliance with Germany before World War I, and, because of this, a term of both the treaties of Versailles and Saint-Germain instructed that the two nations were not to unify. This hurt the pride of both nations, which had been considerably weakened by their defeat in the war. Let's now examine the ways in which Hitler achieved Anschluss. Hitler had first attempted this unification in 1934 in what was called the Dollfuss Affair. This was when the Austrian Chancellor Dollfuss had tried to ban the Austrian Nazi Party. Hitler had then instructed the Nazi Party to riot in protest, and this had resulted in the political assassination of Dollfuss. Despite this, the Austrian army supported the Austrian government, and so the Austrian Nazis were defeated. This taught Hitler a valuable lesson in biding his time, and only taking decisive action when confident he would receive the right amount of military and public support. Let's now examine the different steps that Hitler took to achieve Anschluss in 1938. By January, Hitler felt in a strong enough position to challenge the Austrian government. At this point, the Austrian government was in the hands of a right-wing party led by a chancellor called Kurt Schuschnigg, who ruled largely by decree rather than democratic vote. Seeing the rising threat of the Nazi Party, Schuschnigg declared his support to Hitler, in a vain hope of holding on to power. However, by 1938, the Austrian Nazi Party had grown significantly in size, and they were regularly protesting and rioting against the government. Then in January 1938, Schuschnigg's office was raided by Nazis. In response, Schuschnigg met with Hitler on the 12th of February and pleaded for support to calm and appease the Austrian Nazi Party. Hitler advised that he appoint Nazis into leading positions, for example, into the position of Minister for the Interior. This would essentially make a Nazi in charge of the police and national security, allowing them to establish a police state like the one that had proved so successful in Germany. Hitler also demanded that Schuschnigg release Nazis who were imprisoned as political prisoners. To top it off, Hitler gave Schuschnigg to agree to these suggestions, otherwise he would send troops over the border. Instead of agreeing to Hitler's demands, Schuschnigg decides to hold a plebiscite, which is a public vote, to see if the Austrian people wanted Anschluss. Hitler then demanded that this vote was postponed, and as a result Schuschnigg is forced to back down, and then resign from his position on the 11th of March 1938. On the same day that Schuschnigg resigned, Hitler installs a puppet leader as Chancellor of Austria, in other words, a leader who would follow orders from the German Nazi Party. This was someone called Arthur Seyss-Inquart, and his first action was to declare that Austria was in a state of emergency. This justified the bypassing of democratic process and using rule by decree to ensure Anschluss. On the 12th of March, the following day, Hitler moved troops into Austria. The Austrian people were overjoyed to see the troops and lined the streets to show their support. This helped to reinforce the legitimacy of the unification of the two nations. A month later, on the 10th of April, Seyss-Inquart holds a plebiscite. However, this time, the voting stations were surrounded by Nazi stormtroopers to place intimidation on the voting public. The voting ballot was also phrased in a way that placed pressure on the public to vote yes to the unification of Germany and Austria. Therefore, it is no surprise that the plebiscite vote showed that 99% of Austrians were in favor of Anschluss. Let's now examine the way in which other nations reacted to Anschluss. Whilst it is difficult to trust the plebiscite results, there was still evidence that the majority of the Austrian people supported the unification. The Austrian economy had suffered as a result of the punitive measures of the Treaty of Saint-Germain, and then Austria had further suffered following the Wall Street crash. Therefore, many felt disaffected and wanted radical change. They looked to the way in which the Nazi Party had achieved economic and military success, and they wanted a similar boost to their national pride. However, not all were happy with Anschluss. For example, Austria had a population of 180,000 Jews, and once the Nazis took over, they were victims of persecution. It is said that Hitler cried when he signed the official document to unite Austria and Germany. Furthermore, the German people were overwhelmingly in support of Anschluss. They had been fed propaganda that showed Hitler as a great hero saving a nation in distress. Furthermore, many believed in Hitler's expansionist goals, since they knew that the natural resources they would gain from Anschluss would boost the German economy. Britain continued to follow the policy of appeasement. Many people in Britain believed that Austria and Germany should be allowed to unite, and saw the unification as entirely above board and peaceful. However, Winston Churchill addressed his concerns in the House of Commons. He argued that it was not a peaceful unification, since Hitler had to send troops over the border to enforce the decision. At this stage, though, his concerns fell on deaf ears as the government continued to pursue an anti-war policy. France was still facing a significant number of domestic problems, and so were in no position to challenge Anschluss. For example, 2 days before the unification took place, the whole French government had been forced to resign from their positions due to civil unrest and economic problems. Despite this, the French public continued to be worried about the rise in Nazi power. Finally, it is worth considering the reaction of Czechoslovakia following the successful unification of Germany and Austria. This is because Czechoslovakia was now surrounded by Nazi-occupied territories on three sides. It was blatantly obvious, therefore, that Czechoslovakia would be Hitler's next target. As a result, they pleaded with the French and British for support. In response, the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain corresponded with Hitler and asked him what his intentions were with regards to Czechoslovakia. Of course, Hitler responded saying that there was nothing to worry about, and he did not intend to expand his territory any further. As a consequence of Anschluss, Nazi Germany grew even more in power. Hitler now had better access to Eastern and Southern Europe, so that he could continue his Lebensraum program. He had also gained 100,000 soldiers from the official Austrian army, and Austrian steel production would also help Hitler in his continued rearmament program. Perhaps most importantly, though, was that Hitler had managed to get away with breaking a second significant term of the Treaty of Versailles and gain land in Europe. The Allied powers had not responded, and this encouraged Hitler to take even bolder moves, going deeper into Eastern Europe. Let's return to our overarching question of how did Hitler achieve Anschluss in 1938? Firstly, Hitler wanted Germany to unify with Austria because of the shared heritage and culture between the two nations, and how they had once formed the Central Alliance before World War I. Therefore, he learnt his lesson from his failed attempt in 1934, and used manipulative tactics, so that the Austrian Chancellor essentially invited Hitler into the country. He was then able to appoint key Nazis to position and dismantle Austria's democracy. Once again, the international community was slow to react to Hitler's actions. France was not in a position to act, and Britain continued to follow the policy of appeasement. This meant Hitler felt ever more confident and turned his sights to Czechoslovakia as his next target. Thank you for watching. Tune into the next lecture to learn about how Hitler conquered Czechoslovakia.